Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidhikena yopakarottam pravarammuninam Patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve Patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. So we started this particular chapter, Sadhana Pada, with a definition of Kriya Yoga, which is the way to reduce vritti, to weaken vritti, and then through meditation, these vrittis can be neutralized, eradicated, and through counter-evolution, Pratiprasava, we can get. These are the topics discussed. So we need some kind of a recapitulation. We were discussing one important point, that is Karmashaya. Karmashayas are nothing but residual effects of karma or actions that remain accumulated. Traces of karma or tendencies accumulated or in an unmanifested state in our mind. Whatever we have done, whatever we have thought, whatever we have spoken in this life or in previous life, all these create samskaras and impressions, and they become karmashaya. Karmashaya is nothing but the accumulation of residual effects. We will describe this later. Karmashaya chitta bhumau Ashirati iti ashyeha is a definition by Vachaspati in a famous book called Tattwamayananda, which is commentary on the Patanjali system. Now, we discussed in the last class a few important topics, how these residual effects of karma remain accumulated in the mind, and how they later take fruits in the form of actions. So these are three sutras which I am going to repeat. We will discuss again some important aspects that we did not discuss in the last class. The 12th sutra of Sadhana Pada, Klesha Moolaha Karmashayo Drishta Adrishta Janma Vedaniyaha. This is the 12th sutra, which defines Karmashaya. From a purely psychological point of view, it helps us to understand not only our behavior, but also our destiny. Once we understand the mechanism of human life and what causes our present experiences, what are the causes for our present experiences, we will be able to bring about a change in our own destiny. In fact, that's a very important contribution of Patanjali. As I said earlier, Patanjali's system is the very antithesis of predeterminism. It is neither accidentalism, sometimes called yadrichavada, or predeterminism, sometimes called niyativada in ancient traditions. One of its strongest messages that once we understand, once we get a peep into our real personality, what really causes our present state of affairs, that can help us to start a new life anytime, any day. What we need is a little willpower. That is the practical implication of Patanjali's yoga philosophy, especially his concept of Karmashaya, which is a revolutionary concept. Because modern psychology only analyzes. One main problem is it confines its analysis to our experiences in this life, in the present life. Now, if you ask the question, as I discussed earlier, if you ask the question, why good people suffer and why evil men and women, evil persons have a good time in this life? The concept of a monotheistic, compassionate God cannot give a satisfactory answer. Ethics and morality also cannot give a satisfactory answer. But there is an answer which is very scientific and very rational. Just find out the background, the cause, get a deeper explanation into what we are right now going through. This explanation helps us to bring about a change in our own destiny. I shall give a brief description of this contribution of Patanjali before going further into the Karmashaya concept. So 3 sutras should be kept in mind. I will repeat them and then I will come to the practical implication. First one I already mentioned, Klesha Moolaha Karmasyu Drishta Adrishta Janma Vedaniyaha. Okay. Now, Vedaniyaha means has to be experienced, if not in this life or next life. The residual element of karma or action, the latent deposits, which are really caused by kleshas. It's a root cause. So its residual effect has to be experienced. If we have done the slightest evil thing to anybody, that will create a residual effect which really constitutes Karmashaya. From another point of view, it is called Apuram, Adrishtam, etc. These are the other 2 words. The immediate effect is tangible, visible. When you eat food, your hunger is gone. When you drink water, thirst is quenched. That is the immediate, visible, tangible effect. If you give food to a hungry person, what is the tangible effect? The hungry person's hunger is gone. But there is something else created, which is not visible. Where does it remain? It remains in our own soul or personality, which is not the body, which continues to live even after our death. So this punya effect, the merit of this good action, will be experienced. The result of these good actions will be experienced in our next life. That is true of undesirable actions also. That is the implication of the next sutra. Next means 14th. Te hlada paritapa phalaha punya apunya hedutvad. Now these good actions, they result in happiness or misery, and they are caused by virtue and vice. And they also, according to Patanjali, decide our next life and the way we are going to live our next life. So that's the message of the 13th sutra. Sati mule tat vipako jati ayur bhogaha. That's an interesting sutra. If that klesha, if the root cause, the residual element of what we have done in the past is there, then the fruition, vipaka, the fruition of that karma will take place sometime in the past or in the future. If you have done something in the long past, it may happen in the last life. If you have done the last life, it could reach fruition in this life. If you are doing now, it may reach the fruition in this life itself, in the next life. Here the commentators give an important clue, and that is very interesting from the moral, ethical point of view. The commentators will say that if you do something very good, the intensity of that virtuous deed, good action, will be experienced in this life. That's saving the life of a good person, holy person, doing a great good for a large number of people with total unselfish love and compassion. Any such noble good deeds, intense spiritual practices. It need not necessarily be in the form of a service to others. It could also be in the form of a subjective spiritual practices, meditation, intense contemplation, a sincere effort to change, to bring about a change in our life. All these can produce karma vipaka. Vipaka means fruition of karma in this life itself. If a holy, good action is done in a holy place, a good service is done to a very great person, holy person, then that action will become very intense. So intensity of action is the determining factor whether the fruition of that karma and its effect is felt or experienced in this life or next. Similarly, if you do something very evil on a big scale to a large number of good people, its bad effects will be experienced in this life itself. So the 13th sutra, Satimule tad vipakahu jati ayurbhogaha. So the fruition of all this karmashaya could be in the form of birth, span of life and experiences. How we are born, what will be the span of life, and what will be the experiences in the next life. As I mentioned in the last class, at the time of death, as I mentioned in the last class, all the subtle experiences, impressions and tendencies that we have accumulated in our mind, stuff karmashaya, chittam, will come to the surface and they will become one single impression, and that impression will decide our next life. I already quoted Ramanuja's famous commentary on this Gita verse. That is, he says, Ante antakale yam yam va api bhavam smaran kalevaram tyajadi tam tam bhavam eva maranante eti antipratyayascha purvabhavida vishekha. So there is a famous verse in the Gita, yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajityante kalevaram tam tame vaiti kaunteya sada mudbhava bhavitaha. So Lord Krishna gives an interesting instruction. Always think about God, think about me, means spiritual, ideal, God, good thoughts, good deeds. Because whatever thought you have in your mind at the time of death will determine your next life. Ramanuja gives a very rational explanation. This antipratyaya, or the impression, the idea, the concept, the mental tendencies or the images, whatever we may have, memories, all that we have in our last life, so in the last moment, antipratyaya, will be only a repetition of some experiences that we have gone through sometime in the past. That's why antipratyaya purvabhavida visheka. You cannot all of a sudden think a new thoughts unless we have thoughts, we have had the same thoughts sometime in the past. Now what really happens, according to commentators, at the time of death, all these thought currents will converge into a single vritti, a single impression. That is called antipratyaya. And that's what you carry with you when you are reborn again, going to the next life. They contain all these thought currents, good impressions, everything. They converge together and they become part of the subtle body called Sukshma Sharira, which is deposited in the Chittam, which is called Karmashaya, and we are born with that next life. That's why tendencies, impressions are all transferred from life to life. And so these are the three important sutras that we discussed. Now I'm coming to a practical question, which is really not mentioned in the Patanjali Sutras as such, but Swami Vivekananda indirectly refers to this phenomenon in his lectures on Raja Yoga, where Swamiji gives a very interesting description. Of course, that is related to the practice of pranayama and meditation. So, two approaches in yoga and Vedanta. In yoga, you begin your practice with the grossest dimension of prana, which is our breath. You control that, and eventually you control the nervous energy, and slowly, finally, you are able to control your whole system. In Vedanta, we start with actions without any desire, which is called Karma Yoga, which leads to the purity of mind, and the mind becomes pure. These Karmashayas get completely refined, sublimated, and that leads to liberation. So there is an interesting story which Vivekananda mentions in these Raja Yoga lectures. That's very, very relevant in the context of bringing about a change in our life in the light of this Karmashaya doctrine. There was a king and he had a minister. The minister fell into disgrace. He quarreled, made some difference of opinion, and he was imprisoned by the king. He was put on the top story of a tower. He was imprisoned. He had a good wife, who was a good woman. So every day she would come, walk down to the tower, stand at the bottom of the tower and shout, "Is there anything I can do for you to help you?" So the minister, who was the prisoner, one day told her, "You bring a few items," and he gave a list of items. A beetle, a silken thread, a big rope, strong rope, of course, along with that some stout twine, and also a little honey. These are the items in his list. He asked his wife to bring all this and let him know when she had brought all these items. So next day she brought all this, next night, the following night. Then the minister instructed the wife, "Now take out the beetle and put a drop of honey on his horns, and then tie the silken thread, long silken thread, to the beetle." So the lady did accordingly. So the beetle started its long journey, ascending slowly to the top of the tower. When he reached the tower, he caught hold of the beetle, and then the prisoner, the minister, took the silken thread in his hands. Its bottom was on the ground. And then he told the lady, his wife, to tie the patch thread, a strong thread and twine, to the silken thread. So he dragged this silken thread upward, and finally he caught hold of the patch thread and also the twain. So the bottom end of the twain, the thread, was in the hands of the lady, and the other end on his hands, on the top of the tower. Then he told her, you tie the strong rope, long strong rope, to this thread. That also he dragged upward. So finally he got a strong long rope in his hands. Then he asked his wife to tie the other end of the rope at the bottom to some strong tree or something. And he climbed down and escaped. This story. Now, if you take this yoga system or Vedanta system, there are two approaches. In yoga system proper, you control your mind, you do breathing exercise, then you control the prana, then finally you reach chitta vritti nirodha, the cessation of the modifications. But many Indian philosophers, especially Vedantists, combine this aspect with Vedanta. In Vedanta, there is a much more scientific and rational method of changing our destiny or obtaining liberation, changing a new leaf in our life. So here you find there are several items. You know, the beetle was chasing the smell of the honey. That's how he reached the top of the tower. So that was the grossest. Then there was a slight thin silken thread attached to the beetle. And attached to that there's a strong twine or a thread. And a much longer and stronger rope was tied to that thread. So, the beginning of a spiritual journey is like the silken thread. The goal is to get a strong rope that will take us to the liberation. How do we do in our life? The first step is to try to spiritualize the secular. The main problem for many spiritual seekers is the conflict between the secular and spiritual. That's one question that everyone will ask. Well, I can pray and meditate 2 hours in the morning, maybe 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. But at other times, I cannot think of anything. So there is always a conflict because we compartmentalize. We put spiritual and secular in two compartments without any connecting link between them. See, if we are active for 13 hours of the day in the office, fully immersed in our secular duties and responsibilities, worldly duties and responsibilities. The so-called worldly need not be worldly, it can be spiritualized. That's what the subject we are coming to. So without worrying about spiritual aspect of our life, if you are always engaged in the so-called secular duties and responsibilities, and then at the end of the day, in the evening or morning, if you try to meditate or do prayer or try to think of spiritual things, there will be conflicts. Because from one end of the pendulum, you are going to the other end. So there is always a contradiction. So till now, our mind was in one rhythm, in one place. And then in the evening we are trying to meditate. So there are two possibilities. Both are thought equally undesirable. One possibility is that we become mechanical in spiritual life. So every day, going to temple or a church or in place of worship, do some rituals in a very mechanical way. And then we close the lid. That chapter is over. The rest of the life we are immersed in secular thoughts, worldly activities. Such people do not till they get a shock experience, shock treatment in their life. That's because they manage to put these two things in two separate compartments. But they will never make much spiritual progress. They will not be able to enjoy peace of mind or happiness or contentment. When there is a problem, they are shaken. Because spirituality or religious practices, spiritual practices, were kept completely away and distinct and different from all other activities. So it became purely mechanical. It doesn't help us to enjoy peace of mind, tranquility, or inner contentment, inner peace. The other possibility is that we face conflicts. When we are sincere, we face conflicts. When we are not sincere, we become mechanical. Conflicts arise because we are sincere. So how to resolve these conflicts? We must establish a link, a connecting bridge between the secular and spiritual. We cannot run away from the secular duties and responsibilities, or the so-called non-spiritual duties and responsibilities, part of our life. But we need spiritual practices also. So the solution is to give a spiritual orientation to the secular activities, to spiritualize the secular. That's one idea behind. To give a spiritual color, a spiritual orientation, a spiritual direction to the so-called secular duties and responsibilities. When we are work in the office, consider it as an act of service. Do it with a prayerful attitude. When we teach, when we study, or when we work in the office, all these activities can be given a spiritual orientation. Without that, there will be no end to conflicts. And there is no peace otherwise. So these two dangers should be avoided. One is being mechanical, being insincere. It means mechanically do some rituals and interpreting, that's the end of spirituality. And then we do whatever we want. We don't make any spiritual progress. If you are sincere, then we ask the question, why I am not having peace of mind? Though I pray, I am not able to pray properly, I am not able to meditate properly. This is because when we are sincere, we naturally face these conflicts and problems. So the answer is, there should be a link. And that link will help us to give a spiritual orientation to the secular duties and responsibilities. And finally, the secular merges with the spiritual. That's the highest goal. We do not worry about it. That's a distant highest goal. For great spiritual teachers of the world, every action, every moment, every thought, every word was spiritual. There was practically nothing that was exclusively worldly. So everything was spiritual. That's a goal. But for beginners, they should try with an effort to give a spiritual orientation to the secular, spiritualization of the secular. That's the idea behind. Now, as I said earlier, we already discussed this subject. Vachaspati, a great commentator on Patanjali's system, Tattwamayananda, that's the title of the book. There he says, Chitta bhumu asherate iti asheha. Karmashaya. Ashaya means a kind of, it is a repository. That is chittam, mind stuff. The mind stuff becomes a repository in which the accumulation of subliminal traces of karma, all these takes place. Karmas get accumulated, tendencies and impressions. So they are already there. That's why we face conflicts. To run away from conflicts, people try to become mechanical with disastrous consequences because they never make any progress by mechanically doing anything. It's a waste of effort. But when we are sincere, even if we face conflicts, it's better, because when we do face conflicts, it's because we are sincere and honest, and that conflicts will naturally prompt us to find a solution to these conflicts. So the method is to give a spiritual orientation by integrating the element of unselfishness to every action. Every action can be linked with the spiritual ideal of unselfishness, which is technically called Karma Yoga in the language of Vedanta. And Shankaracharya says Karma Yoga will take you to the highest liberation. Karmanishthayaha chitta suddhidvarena purushartha hedutvam na swatantrena jnananishtha tu swatantrena purushartha hedu anyan apeksha. Meaning is this karmanishtha, unselfish action, spiritualized secular duties and responsibilities. Secular duties and responsibilities, everyday responsibilities, given a spiritual orientation is karmanishtha. It's like the silken thread in that illustration. Once you catch hold of the beetle who is chasing the smell of the honey, then you can catch hold of the silken thread that is tied to the beetle. And once you get hold of the silken thread, then eventually you can also reach the thread that is tied to this silken thread. And once you get a thread in your hands, then you can also reach the long, strong rope. And once you get hold of the rope in your hands, then you can get liberation. You can get out of the tower. That's the idea behind. And this is possible for everyone. So in ascending order, one can bring about a change in one's destiny. In fact, that is one major contribution of Patanjali's system. How to start a new life, a new chapter in our life. How to refine our vritti from sthula to sukshma, from gross to subtle, from kindergarten to the highest university education, spiritual life. We can all start with giving a spiritual orientation to the secular. Because we cannot start spiritual life as such. If anybody imagines that after doing hard work in the office for 13 hours and we can drive home and then start meditation for long, intense meditation, it's not possible. We can try. All kinds of conflicting thought currents. Or we may sleep also, and we imagine we have meditated for a long time. So, to be successful in spiritual life, we must begin with giving a spiritual orientation to the secular duties and responsibilities. So, as I said earlier, this apurvam, adrishtam and karmashaya. Dharma, dharmau, adrishtam syad. This is the definition in Bhasha Paricheda. All these latent tendencies, impressions that are gathered in our karmashaya, in the chittam, are the result of different actions we have done in the past. Some of them very good, some of them not so good. The good actions will help us to continue doing good actions. The bad actions may prompt us to continue bad actions. So, that is a great contribution of Patanjali's system. Now we'll come to the main topic. Now, according to Patanjali's system, this karmashaya also finally leads to rebirth. That is an interesting discussion in Patanjali's system. As I said earlier, all actions have got two types of effects. They are both interlinked. One is the individual effect. It's called micro effect, it can be called. It could be in the form of klesha, vasana, and so on. Samskaras. Whatever we do, it creates a samskara, a vasana in our mind. The other one is cosmic, karmic effect, which goes far beyond the visible, which influence our whole destiny, which finally decide our rebirth. Now, finally, this micro and macro. The micro means the vasanas and samskaras and vrittis. That micro means the individual effect of karmas and actions, and the cosmic effect in the form of adrishta or apurva. They come together and they decide our destiny. Individual effects of our actions influence the cosmic effect. We do certain things, we think certain things in a certain way because we have already formed a kind of adrishta and apurva, cosmic effect of our actions, vasanas, tendencies and impressions accumulated over hundreds of lives in the past. So accordingly we do certain things. And what all we do right now also in their turn add or they may have impact on these cosmic samskaras. And then this karmic residuum causes the rebirth of the microcosm. And so what happens? The overall impact, the overall nature, characteristic of these karmic actions finally determine the nature of our next life. How this happens, I can explain with the help of some illustrations. One important point in yoga psychology is we don't do anything new. Everything is a revision. This is a very interesting contribution of yoga system. I remember many of these details of yoga system are acceptable to Vedanta also, all other systems of Indian philosophy. Whatever we do right now, we do because we have done in the past. Our attitude, our approach towards different experiences, different phenomena taking place around us are determined by our previous attitudes that we already had in the past. That means everything is a revision. These are coming from the past life. So, the life, birth and experiences, that means jiva, janma, ayu and bhoga, these are three terms used in Patanjali system. Janma means birth, ayu means lifespan, and bhoga means experiences. All these are determined by the cosmic residuum, the cosmic residual element of all the actions in the past. And they can be good or they can be bad. The intensity of the effect or the impact is often determined by the power with which memories are strongly registered in the mind. To give you an example, a very painful experience will produce a very strong, painful attitude in the mind towards identical experiences. A very pleasant experience will also cause an identical attitude towards identical similar experiences. Sometimes these memories from past life may be experienced not in waking state but in dream state. So Vedanta and Yoga converge on this point. In waking state, we experience things in a very gross manner. Mind and the senses of perception, senses of action. These 11 elements are engaged, involved in all waking state experiences called Jagrat. Jagrat means waking state. In waking state, we see things because our eyes and mind cooperate, come together, so we can see many things. We understand things by seeing. We hear things because ears, the sense of hearing and mind come together. We walk because mind and the sense of seeing, vision, eyes, and our feet come together. So all experiences in waking state are gross experiences because mind plus either all or some of these senses of perception or senses of action are involved. The intensity with which these experiences take place will determine the power of memory in our mind. And once these experiences are registered in the mind, they come back to us in dream state. That's why we can never have a dream experience which is completely divorced or separate from waking state experiences. Dream experiences are not exact duplication of waking state experiences, but cannot be completely different or divorced from waking state experiences. In dream state, we can travel thousands of miles in split seconds because mind alone is involved in dream state. Senses of action and senses of perception are not involved. Only mind is involved. Mind is projecting experiences in dream state. So they call subtle, sukshma. In waking state, mind plus all the senses are involved. There are differences and also there are similarities in waking and dream experiences. Dream experiences are not different from memories according to Vedanta. When you see an object, you see with your eyes. When you close your eyes, you see the same object with your mind. Similarly, because eyes are not involved, mind is involved. So also dream. So there are differences because this is called Kala, Desha, Bheda and Sukshma, Sthula Bheda. These are the three differences with regard to experiences in the dream and waking state. In waking state, you need 6 hours to reach New York. So there is Kala Bheda. In dream state, 1 split second. So difference with regard to time. You go to sleep in San Francisco and you dream you reach somewhere in Germany or maybe in Europe. So Desha Bheda, difference with regard to space. And also dream experiences are subtle and waking state experiences are gross. These are differences. But you can never dream going to Germany unless you have thought of going to Germany sometime during your waking state. You may have, or you can never think of going to any place in the world unless such an idea had occurred to you when you are reading a book, when you are engaging in some conversation, or Vedanta will tell you it may be related to something belonging to previous life. So there are similarities, there are also dissimilarities. So all these are accumulated in the Karmashaya. We have to remember one important factor. Karmashaya is the accumulated, subliminal, latent, subtle samskaras and tendencies which are stored there, which are waiting to take form in the form of action, which may prompt us to repeat identical actions. They need not necessarily be related to physical actions. A flash thought, a sudden thought, an idea or a concept will also register a memory or an impression in the Karmashaya as much as direct physical involvement. So all these will be accumulated in Karmashaya. So in a way, we can easily find this expressing itself in our own life. As I mentioned this a few times earlier. Sometimes we want to do some wonderful things. We are sincerely want to do. We are ready to pay we are ready to invest a lot of money in that. We are ready to work hard. But we cannot. So the intellect is convinced that a good thing should be done. All people also will help you. The circumstances are very positive, helpful. But you cannot do that. So there is always a conflict between what you want to do and what you are able to do, what you are really able to do. Whatever the intellect wants you to do, the mind is not willing to cooperate. Why should there be a conflict? The conflict is the mind is full of different types of diverse thought currents, impressions, samskaras, kleshas accumulated innumerable previous life. So they are not always helpful because of the diversity and mutual contradictory nature of these conflicting thought currents. Sometimes manifest in the form of non-cooperation. So mind is not willing to cooperate, but the intellect is very much eager to do. This is a common problem. This is what really happens to a very sincere spiritual seeker. You want to meditate, want to do wonderful things, you start a new life. A thief takes a decision not to steal anymore, but he can't help it. Person may decide not to tell lie anymore, but can't help it. So why should there be conflict, a contradiction? The conflict is because the accumulated samskaras and impressions block your effort to start a new life, to open a new chapter in our life. Now Vedanta comes to the rescue. Vedanta says, you need not worry about what you are doing. You need not worry about your actions. You take care that the attitude with which you do things is positive and helpful. So, give a new perspective to whatever we do. The mind, the mental attitude can be given a spiritual orientation. And that will give our actions also a spiritual orientation. And that will give a spiritual orientation to whatever we do, whatever we speak, whatever we think, everything. So giving a spiritual orientation to whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we speak, is the beginning of starting a new chapter in spiritual life. And so that's the most practical implication, relevance of Patanjali's concept of Karmashaya in modern times. So we will have discussion for about 10 minutes. And before that, I will announce, we will continue the discussion of this topic again in the next class. But there is an announcement. The announcement is this: we will not have class next Friday, that is May 22nd, because of our Memorial Day program at Ulima. So please remember, the next class will be on Friday, May the 29th at 7:30 p.m. So there will be no class next Friday, May 22nd, and the next class on Patanjali Yoga Sutras will be on Friday, May the 29th at 7:30 p.m. Thank you. Now we can have interaction or discussion.
So if I say don't want to do good, but my action did lot of good to some people, lot of people. Now but somebody else wants to do lot of good to people, but his actions doesn't, make it happen that way. So what happens to the karma falls like here?
Could you repeat that question once more?
So I want to do, I don't want to do good to people, but for some reason my actions, what I did, they did lot of good to the people.
Yeah, yes.
And somebody doesn't want, he wants to do good, but their action, whatever they do, it doesn't work.
Yeah, okay.
So in that
It happens to be bad for others,
right.
Bad result.
But the attitude is there. So what happens in that case?
A sincere attitude to do good things will eventually enable the person to do things that will be eventually good for others. I'm answering the latter part of the question. If a person is really sincere, though whatever he does may not be always good for everyone, It may be good for others. A sincere person trying to do good things can never do anything which will be bad for everyone. That's what. May not be good for everyone, but may not be bad for everyone. And eventually the sincerity or the inner goodness, innate goodness will enable him eventually to do good things which may be good for others. In the former case, even if your actions happen to be good for others, if it so turns out to be good for others, though you didn't want it that way, it may produce a helpful result. Because you did it because your innate nature is to do good things. That's the reason. There are many people who want to tell a lie, strike a strong decision to tell a lie. I'm going to tell a lie. But when that person speaks, it may be truth. There are many people who take a strong decision to tell a truth, maybe first time in his life, but it may not be possible. When he really tells, it may be a lie. So very often, people who are by their very nature good, whatever they do, you may not intend it, you may not have an intention to do anything good for others. If it really turns out to be good for others, it's because you really had an innate good nature. You can never say, I always do things without really any good intention, but it all becomes good for others. No, it can't be. It never be that way. Maybe one or two actions. And no one can say, I always try to do good for others, but always bad for them. No, that also may not be possible. So there is sometimes, the way our mind functions, we can never logically analyze. Purely subjective. A person who is intrinsically good, who really is a good natured person, by very nature, by inherent nature, he is a good person, or she is a good person, that person cannot go on doing bad things for others. Again, it's a deliberation that's related to attitude. Deliberation and attitude are totally different. If our attitude is always positive, then we cannot deliberately do bad things for others. Actions which turn out to be bad for others. We cannot do that. Though logically we can think it, but no, our mind doesn't follow our logic. That's an interesting thing. We can logically analyze a machine, a doctrine, a philosophy, but mind doesn't follow that logic. Mind has a way of it following its own logic, which is beyond our perception. Second point is, when we do good things, our mind changes. Sometimes we logically try to analyze the function of our mind. I can give an example. I gave the example last time. If we go to library and take a decision to read a good book, your mind will be totally different when you return from the library. It will have evolved, at least temporarily. You went to the library with one kind of mind, one type of mind, and you read some wonderful books. Or you may have gone to a place of worship, gone to some person's, holy person, with some long discussion. The mind with which you return will be different from the mind with which you went to that library or the holy person, which we cannot logically analyze before we actually do it. So, because when mind accumulates new vrittis, new impressions, it really changes. That's why spiritual life we can never really analyze logically. We are playing with the mind which is not within our control. That's an interesting thing. It's like when we take the first step, the mind with which we take the first step will be different from the mind with which we are going to take the next step, second step. The mind must have already become better, it must have evolved, it must have grown spiritually. So that's what really happens. So really good intentions will always will force you to do things which turn out to be good for others. All actions may not be always good for everyone. No, that's true. But a real, genuine person, a person who is really good, cannot always do bad actions for everyone all the time. It's not possible. The other extreme also is impossible. That's the point. Yes.
So what about the circumstance, which I think we see a lot today, where the intention of doing a good action is there, but really out of self-interest? So, so many organizations do philanthropic work, maybe because they want the positive publicity or they want the tax benefit, but they actually don't really care about the outcome of their good work. And so when the intention is still a selfish one, though the gesture is meant to be positive, where does this lie in terms of the karmic burden later on?
Yeah. From a spiritual point of view, it is not the efficiency of actions done with great selfishness and professionalism. From a spiritual point of view, it doesn't help you much. On the other hand, you find people who are not very successful, maybe not very efficient, but very unselfish. May not always succeed, but they are enjoying inner peace. And very successful people who are very efficient, they may be from a ordinary point of view, they are successful, but they don't enjoy the inner peace which an unselfish person enjoys. When it depends upon how much value we attach to this inner subjective experience. When we look for the higher contentment or peace within, then you find success and perfection or efficiency or professionalism may not always produce inner peace and contentment. May produce tangible results. True. But at the subjective level, that person may not be always enjoying peace of mind. So Patanjali is essentially dealing with the individual's spiritual journey and spiritual unfoldment. Patanjali is not talking about organization or efficiency or professionalism and all that. His main focus is how to evolve spiritually at the subjective level. So a person may not be very professional, very efficient, very successful from a worldly point of view, but may have a lot of peace and inner contentment, tranquility. That person, that's what Patanjali is, because that person is evolving spiritually. Another person may be very successful, very professional, very efficient. His results are highly desirable, but taking pills for getting 2 hours sleep every night. The other person can sleep happily, though he may not be successful by secular worldly standards. The so-called successful person may have to take pills for getting 3 hours sleep. So Patanjali's focus is mostly our inner spiritual journey. That's the idea. It is not, Patanjali's system is more psychological spiritual than philosophical spiritual. That's the idea behind. Yes.
Swami, this idea about good intentions no matter what our behavior is that sort of like the power of attorney thing with Purish?
Oh yes. That is a special example you find is, say, a great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, who was practically leading a very bohemian life, very almost like a profligate. He was a popular writer. He had many extraordinary qualities, but his life was not very disciplined. But and when Sri Ramakrishna asked him, could you take the name of God twice a day, in the morning and evening, he said, you won't know when he's going to get up in the morning or the evening, because you won't know when sun is going to rise in the east or going to set in the west. He was fully drunk. So what could such a man do? And he could not promise to do something which he knew very well that he could not really practice. So Sri Ramakrishna understood that he was a very sincere spiritual seeker. Because earnest, that's why he came to Sri Ramakrishna. But he was very truthful, very sincere, very genuine, because he was not willing to promise to do something which he knew very well that he won't be able to do. So Sri Ramakrishna understood his good quality. So he knew if this man really does something, it means he means to do that. Because when Sri Ramakrishna asked him to take the name of God once in the morning, he said, no, I can't give word. A lesser man would have said, all right, I will do it, and nothing will happen to him. But in his case, as I said earlier, he was not willing to promise to do anything which he knew very well that he won't be able to do that, to keep. So he won't promise that. So Sri Ramakrishna understood this man had one extraordinary quality which may help him to become a spiritually enlightened person. So he asked him to give power of attorney. He knew whatever he will do sincerely. So if you really can give the power of attorney to God, this moment you can become liberated. But people really cannot do that. That's the main problem. If you can really pray to God, tomorrow onwards I won't do anything wrong, then that moment we can all become saints. But really it doesn't happen, because when we say something, we do not always mean that we will do that. That's why, in St. Augustine's confession, sincere confession can bring about a new life for any spiritual seeker. It should not become a license renewal ceremony often. So very often, real confession with prayer can make any sinner a saint. But it doesn't happen as it happened in the case of Girichandra Ghosh. Because he was so sincere, so honest, so truthful. So in his case, once he gave a promise, he meant to keep it. But that doesn't happen to everyone, because mind is so much dissipated. Very often when we say, as I said, when we believe in something, we are only trying to believe. That's what happens. So in his case, he could not do anything which he did not believe. And he wouldn't believe in anything which he knew he would not do. So that was his greatness. That enabled him to start a new chapter in his life. It doesn't happen to everyone. Such things, they completely alter the Karmashaya. The most powerful component of Kriya Yoga is Ishvara Pranidhana. Tapa Swadhyaya Ishvara Pranidhana. If one can give completely to God, self-surrender, prapatti or sharanagati as it is called in Ramanuja system, Vaishnava system. The complete self-surrender. If it is 100%, then that moment you start a new life. If that surrender is 100%, then that person starts a new life from that moment. But it doesn't happen. If the complete self-surrender takes place, then all the accumulated karmas, their results, all the impressions, samskaras, they completely get wiped out, and a new strong karmashaya will emerge. It is called mahavritti in Patanjali system. All the other vrittis, all other impressions are completely neutralized, and in their place a great spiritual impression is it will emerge in its place.
So did Girish change at that point, or was it gradual?
No, then that moment the change is sudden and immediate, depending upon the intensity and the spiritual fitness of the seeker. If the seeker is really genuine, then the transformation is immediate and quick. I gave the example sometime earlier, it is called Shabda Parokshvada according to Sureshwaracharya's system, and I call it Prasankhyanavada according to the Mandana and Vajaspadi's Misra system. Two approaches in Vedanta. According to one approach, when you listen to great spiritual truths, whether you read, you listen with great attention, according to one school, the idea, the real implication of the great spiritual truth that you read or that you listen to doesn't register very strongly in your mind. It comes to you only as an intellectual idea or a concept, as it happens to most people. But then they are sincere, so gradually they try to work out this concept and they try to reach the experience dimension of this idea. Right now it's only a concept. They want to translate that concept into real experience. For that they have to go through a lot of spiritual practices, meditation, unselfish action, constant contemplation of the meaning of these great spiritual truths. It's called Prasankhyanavada. But there are some spiritually illumined souls, highly elevated souls. For them, hearing once is enough. It's called Sabda Parokshvada. Means, once you listen to a great idea, that idea is not a concept or a doctrine, but it's an experience to you, depending upon our spiritual fitness. So I give the example. Suppose some of you have lost your passport or identity card. Let us say, God forbid it ever happens. But suppose it happens. It's a very important document for you. And you go in search of that in the street. If you find that identity card lying in the street, you won't mistake. You won't think, this is my identity card or piece of paper. Should I take it or not? You don't think for one split second. You immediately take it and put it in your pocket. Why? Because your whole mind was focused on that particular document. It is a matter of survival for you. Maybe. So, all other impressions and vrittis have completely disappeared from your mind. Your whole mind is focused on that particular document which you want to retrieve, want to get back. So when you see that lying on the street, you take it. That is like a great spiritual person who is highly illumined. If that person reads in a book a great spiritual truth, that truth is not a concept. For him or for her, it becomes an experience. Because in his mind, there are no other vrittis, no other impressions, nothing. Just as when you are going in search of your identity card, your mind is focused on that. So when you see that in front of you lying on the street, you have no hesitation, you take it. Similarly, after long spiritual practices, meditation, when your mind is fully ready and prepared, when you become spiritually fully qualified, then when you read in a book a great spiritual truth, immediately you realize, oh, that is true. And it remains there, depending upon the intensity with which this idea gets registered in the mind. That's what really happens when you read a great classic also. When you read great novels, short stories, plays, poetry. Suddenly you get the feeling, oh, that is true. Why? Because that may not always remain with you, but you understand, oh, you get the feeling that this is really genuine truth. It may not be spiritual idea, not necessarily spiritual, related to some facts of real human life. When you find them stated in a great poetry or a novel or a short story or a play, when you read it, when you listen to it, you get the feeling, oh, that is true. In fact, that is one sign of a great classic. That's why when you read Dostoevsky or Shakespeare, Hamlet, or Brothers Karamazov, Tolstoy, you find certain great universal not spiritual perhaps, certain great universal truths of human life are stated in those classics. So one can read any number of times and you suddenly get the feeling that is true. But when you read spiritual books, and if you are spiritually elevated soul, fully qualified, who have reached the highest level of fitness, once you read it, once you listen to it, it becomes an experience to you. Sri Ramakrishna listened to the Upanishad statement, Mahavakya. Immediately it became an experience to him. His guru had to work for several years. For Sri Ramakrishna, listening once was enough because he had already gone through it, that experience. So it depends upon our own spiritual fitness. We can increase our spiritual fitness by accumulating spiritual ideas in our mind through good actions, good deeds, good thoughts, good impressions. Okay. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. That's it. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanastu.